Welcome, Rajeev.
Thanks, Ed. Absolute pleasure to be here.
It's sweltering outside and it's air conditioned in here, so it's very nice to be here and be nice and cool. I've made the cardinal Tony Blair error of wearing a thin blue shirt today, so when I arrived I looked a bit of a mess, but I'm now cool and calm. So let's just talk a little bit. Fixflo, a lot of people have heard of. We can talk about other stuff in a minute, but whose idea was it?
So, the idea of Fixflo, what Fixflo is, which is a system to help people deal with maintenance and repairs in properties, how it came about. So, the problem was from my experience, but what Fixflo is really driven by market feedback. So, if I sort of separate out those two things, I was a lawyer for a very long time. I was working in London and then got Rugby World Cup tickets, which, if you're a rugby fan, can remember in 2011 was over in New Zealand, and I couldn't get enough time off work to go through the games at group level through to the final, and I was fully expecting England to win. So I called up a law firm in New Zealand and got a job over there. Trust me, this is linking back to Fixflo. Moved over to New Zealand with my partner, and we were both lawyers, but at the same time we were renting out properties in London. So we saw the pain of property repairs and maintenance in the rental sector, both from the perspective of landlords, so tenants calling us at what I describe as ungodly hours in New Zealand about things they ought to have fixed themselves, as well as renting a property that was horrendously leaky and our clothes were going mouldy. And it just struck me that through both sides of that, the repairs process was broken. I didn't know what Fixflo was or would be and will become, but I knew that there was a problem. I came back to England and then sort of followed the lean startup process of getting out and speaking to people. So I walked the streets and spoke to letting agents and contractors and surveyed tenants and found out the problems they had. And only with that information did we start building a solution to the problems. So,
Because what I think has been particularly fascinating about Fixflo is the fact that it is perceived as being something that helps tenants as much as it helps agents and landlords. Because a lot of tenants tend to just panic when something goes wrong. They don't know what to do. So the idea that they got a simple app that they can go to and press a button, which is a picture literally of the thing that's gone wrong, and then someone responds to it. That is it's not revolutionary, but to put it in such a simple place is revolutionary, isn't it?
So I don't think you could or should have an expectation that a tenant will be an expert in the way in which a property works. And so our system is not pro-tenant, agent, landlord or contractor. The whole purpose of our system is to help problems get fixed as easily and effectively. So just taking a really simple example, if let's take the opposite of today. So a day in the winter where the heating's not working in a rental property. Now, I believe that a tenant doesn't really care whether a contractor comes out to get the heating working or they can fix it themselves. What they're really interested in is getting their heating working as quickly as possible. So our system helps them to understand what the problem is, steps they could take safely to see whether they can mitigate the problem. So any property managers listening are likely to have come across a tenant who said, my boiler's not working, when it's either not switched on, they've not allowed enough time for the water to heat, or they have the thermostat wrongly set. So we help tenants to get rid of those problems and get their heating back on. And then if they can't, having followed those steps, we help the property manager and then the contractor to get all the right information to fix the problem first time. So saving money for the landlord, helping contractors to bring the right tools and equipment, helping property managers to deliver great service, and helping tenants to live in a habitable home.
So for people listening who might think that this is someone trying to give the hard sell to their business, just let the listeners know. I mean, your penetration into the market is quite substantial now, isn't it? I mean, how many agents are using you?
So it's north of 4,500 lettings branches across the UK, equating to about 35% of the UK market. Across residential sectors, which we term as residential letting, so letting agents, block management, build to rent and social housing, more than 1.2 million homes across the UK use our software. And we also used in 300 petrol stations, hotels, offices and industrial estates.
Okay, so this is not a startup.
I think we have recently joined the scale up or the sort of adolescent phase of our growth. So I think we're out of the startup bit.
I mean, I think it's, as I say, as I said earlier, you and I have talked a bit over the years, and you were very helpful to me. I mean, what's interesting is that obviously I came out as being an estate agent into an industry where I knew there was an issue. You had been a tenant. I genuinely didn't know that's what it was all about. That's why it's interesting to talk to you today. I didn't know whether you'd been an estate agent or a lettings agent and seen a problem, but yours is that you've been a tenant. And
So I was a tenant and a landlord at the same time, as well as working. So I was sort of in the property sector throughout my professional career. So I was a real estate lawyer. So I saw quite a lot through that as well.
Okay. And it is the source of, lettings is a business which clearly the government have sought to regulate quite rightly because it's fast moving, it's emotional. I sat on the board of the Property Ombudsman for 10 years, and when lettings agents were suddenly forced to become members of a redress scheme, I won't say that complaints about the letting sector swamped the TPA's office, but they very quickly became the majority. So it's clearly an issue which produces problems. And anything which mitigates that, which is the word you used earlier, so enables people to use their brain. I mean, it is extraordinary. I mean, when I'm sitting at home and there's a problem with the boiler, I'm not saying it's a bloke thing, but I will go and check that the water's, the pressure isn't low. I'll bleed radiators. I'll do all the sort of stuff you'd expect. But the majority of people, as you say, they just aren't property experts. But it's the major thing they're paying for these days. Whatever people's percentage, 30-40% of their income is going on their rental. Yet they don't know anything about the actual management of it. And when they get it wrong, it's a nightmare. So the ability to be able to look at something pictorially, simply look at your phone and see a picture of what it is that's gone wrong. So you've moved into the adolescent phase. I mean, you just mentioned petrol stations. What the hell does Fixflo do in petrol stations?
So while we're best known for the pictorial repair reporting interface that you've described, that is probably 5 to 10% of the total solution. So the Fixflo solution is reactive repair reporting, which could be pictorial. We're launching something called Fixphone in the next week or so, which is an AI-powered telephone line for residents who would prefer to report things by telephone rather than go online. We have a partnership with a IoT, Internet of Things provider. So if there is a water leak that's sensed by one of their devices, it can automatically come into our system. The second thing we do is we allow contractors to be instructed either by clicking a few buttons or automatically getting quotes or instructing the right contractor, and also making sure that they're insured and qualified. So we have about 13,500 contractors across the UK using our platform. But the bit that the petrol stations use predominantly is around compliance and periodic work. So anything that needs to happen in the future or on a cyclical basis can be programmed into our system, automatically allocated with risk reports that come off the back showing statutory compliance. And that's what the petrol stations use. We've also recently signed up a couple of interesting clients. So a sweets factory in Malta, who's using us predominantly for compliance, but also one of the most prestigious boarding schools in the UK is now using us, and a farmer for their hedge maintenance.
Spoken like a true lawyer, the compliance bit. You're quite lucky to have that bit covered. So you're clearly moving well beyond that original brief of doing something and doing it well and simply. It's really rolling out.
So our aim is to help professional property managers deliver excellence to their clients, and so we're entirely property focused. The aim was always beyond residential, but we don't see ourselves extending beyond repairs and maintenance. So that's our core competency, and we spent 5 years now building on that. And our aim is, and hopefully we're getting towards being the best solution for property, whether residential or commercial, around the world.
Yeah, well, certainly from what I've seen, I think you're well on the way to that. I mean, global domination, obviously next. I know the feeling. So prop tech. I mean, obviously, you came from the background where you had some experience. What is your? It's getting. I won't say prop tech is now maturing, but it's been around. The word has been around for 3 or 4 years.
Yep.
There have been an awful lot of people sort of come and go from the world of prop tech. What do you think the mistakes that people make when they start a prop tech business are, and how do you think they can better enable agents to understand what they're doing and what they can offer? What's the mistake that most prop tech companies make?
That's a phenomenally good question. I think that the challenges that prop tech founders face are probably the same as tech founders across other sectors, so insurtech or fintech, and that is going in with a preconceived idea based on limited experience, typically personal experience only, of a particular challenge, without validating whether the problem that they're trying to solve or the value they're trying to provide is something that is wanted by the market, and secondly, whether it is a sufficiently painful process that they are looking to enhance, that people will pay money for it on a scalable basis. So I get approached by a lot of prop tech founders, pretty early stage guys typically, and they have a solution that solves a particular problem they had in buying, selling or renting a property, whether as a landlord or a tenant, but they haven't gone out and put in the yards in understanding what agents in particular.
So they haven't done what you did, which is walking up and down the street, going to lettings agents and saying, what's the problem?
My hit rate was, as in people who were willing to speak to me for, say, 5 minutes, was about 1 in 10. So I walked into a lot of doors.
It's a soul-destroying thing, isn't it?
It's tough, and I took quite I think it's now in hindsight an unconventional approach. So my approach was to find out why the business or the problem I was trying to solve wouldn't be a viable business, rather than trying to validate my idea. So my approach was to walk in and say, a friend of mine has approached me to join their business. I don't think it's a very good idea. You're an expert. Could you just tell me why you don't think this would work? And that's because if you go in and say, my name is Bob, I'm really excited about this thing, I'm going to give up my job, I'm going to throw my heart and soul into it, people don't want to let you down. And if people don't tell you why what you're doing won't work, you'll end up spending more time and money delivering something that somebody doesn't want.
That's so true. That is so true. People are, particularly the English, are very keen to sort of talk about something and big it up, but as soon as you're out the door, they'll forget about it. So to look at it from the other side and to say, why wouldn't this work, gives them a license to say why they wouldn't think
and that's
work.
The most valuable bit of every conversation.
Yeah, it is, the stuff that wouldn't work well. And as I said, that's what really was important 3 years ago when starting Vuber and meeting you and talking to you, was to say, is this thing about, when you're starting, particularly a prop tech business, you're going to talk to lots and lots, and part of the problem with the industry in which we are working is that it's very disparate. Lots and lots of different people. 70% of them are one office, two office operations. Yep. They're run by empowered is the wrong word, but people with very strong opinions. Is trying to get something which appeals to everybody, and they all have a different idea. They also, if you could do this, I'd use it. So you say, oh great, we'll go and build that little bit of it. And you end up with lots and lots of it. I think it's one of the things that early on Repit made a mistake doing. Repit is a CRM system for agents. Went into lots of different companies, and as far as I can work out, there are so many different versions of Repit and lots of different companies. It's a nightmare to pull it all together. Repit have changed now, and I think what they're doing with effectively an open API so that CRM systems can at last think about actually engaging with decent prop tech solutions, incorporate them into the CRM systems, because one of the things I think perhaps about what you've done at Fixflo, which is interesting, is that most estate agents seem to be very, very anti the idea of double entry. They don't want to have to enter things into 2 or 3 different systems.
Correct.
So have you managed to make any inroads with the CRM guys? Is that something you thought about early on?
So philosophically, we if I take you back, my business partner's Duncan. He doesn't like appearing on podcasts or anywhere, but he is
Hello,
my
Duncan.
better half. You've met Duncan, of course. And before we started the business, we spent months talking about philosophically, if this business were to work, what kind of business do we want to build? What kind of employer do we want to be? How are we going to approach the world? And we took an open approach, which is we wanted to work with other partners, as we view them, for the betterment of clients and their users. So we entered the market with an integrations first approach, and we've got about 40 different software integrations around the world, ranging from companies that you mentioned, so Repit, Cube, and most of the major CRM players, but not all of them. Inventory and inspection apps, IoT devices I mentioned, PayProp as a payment processing platform. So integrations have been a key part of what we've done, and understanding that clients don't want and should not expect to double enter data is critical. So if you look at Salesforce and Xero, it's about, I think, an ecosystem approach to technology, and that's the one that will win.
It's mostly with the CRM systems, computer says no job. So in terms of the integration that you did you look at that from a point of view of employing someone to go and sit with the CRM software guys and say, right, this is what we'll do? Because mostly my experience of a lot of the CRM players, and there are an awful lot of them, although they're beginning to rationalise out, Zoopla are mashing everyone together into one system, Repit is obviously a big player. But because there are so many different ones, actually, integrating, certainly in the past, has been quite an expensive job for the CRM suppliers themselves.
Yes.
It's hassle, and they need to change their systems. So did you go about that by saying, well, don't worry, we'll do the work for you? How did you don't have to give away any trade secrets here, but
We're pretty open about what we do. So we have a publicly available API, which is released to integration partners. The APIs are published on our website, but then access to use them is via an API license, which is neutral and fair.
But we all know that APIs are only any good when we know what information they pull out of what fields. So some of the CRM systems don't have necessarily unified data. It's difficult to know which fields you're going to pull information from. So isn't that an issue?
Our touch points with CRMs are relatively limited and pretty well understood. So we went through a process mapping piece with some of our larger earlier adopter clients to understand what would be required. And the questions that we go through, if this is useful or interesting to your audience, is what do you do before or after using our system? What data do you have to copy paste from one system to the other? And once you've understood the must-haves and nice-haves, that sort of defines the scope of what the integration ought to do.
I mean, that's why I like talking to you, because what you talk about is so granular and so because of the nature of what you do, because it is what's the right word? It's sort of it's not quite an everything everywhere thing, but for tenants, and it needs to be detailed and it needs to work. So it's interesting that you went for you clearly did an awful lot of research. It was necessary for you to make sure you had the right people to understand the market you were going into and then give them what they needed. Whereas I think for a lot of prop tech companies, they tend to just shout about how marvellous they are. Yep. They'll try and get some publicity from Estate Agent Today or Property Industry Eye. They then get shouted at and thrown mud at by all the usual people who try and do these things down. And I think it's quite disheartening, I think, for a lot of people when they do it. And, if you were... I think the other thing is people expect things to happen quickly. How quickly did things start to happen for you at Fixflo when you started?
So incredibly slowly for the first 6 months, which was the sort of research phase. So stepping through the sort of the system development, it was an idea. Then it was a PowerPoint presentation.
An idea when? When was that? Was that after the 2011 World Cup? Is that when you had the idea?
Came back after a bit of travelling because it would be rude not to. Went backpacking through Indonesia, came back to England, and I got a job as a consultant to a football club in London, advising them on their stadium redevelopments. So using a bit of commercial and property legal knowledge. And my side hustle was Fixflo. And so speaking to people, then PowerPoint, then interactive wireframes, and only when we had people who wanted to buy the interactive wireframes did we actually start building a system. And I was very lucky. So Duncan is both a lovely human being, but also a hugely competent developer. So he was, in fact, Ed, you're of a vintage where you'll remember this. He was the chief technology officer and a board director of Friends Reunited.
Right.
So he's built big scalable systems. So at its peak, Friends Reunited had half of the UK population on it at any one time. And so
what happened to Friends Reunited?
Friends Reunited was acquired by ITV and then acquired by various other publishers and was recently turned off. I think I'll describe...
Great data, though.
Great data at the time. I think deprecated data over time as people stopped engaging. And it's quite interesting. So it's the sort of unknown unknowns. At the point at which Friends launched, there was no Facebook. And then there was no Facebook in the UK. And then suddenly there was a Facebook in the UK and it just took over.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Interesting that you mentioned unknown unknowns and unknown unknowns and unknown knowns and known knowns. Obviously, with the prop tech industry, what do you think are the known knowns? Because clearly it's been developing. There's been enough water under the bridge with prop tech for people to begin to see what is working.
Yes.
I think there's been a very sensible amalgamation of some of the better offerings into groupings, this thing like the Innovation Collaboration Group, which I think is a really good idea to have the sort of best-in-class, genuine best-in-class, not people who are paying to be members of it. People are saying, they're judged by their peers within the group to say, these people really deserve to be here, to then be able to go into agents and say, this is... all these things work. Take which ones you think are best. I think that's a really good idea. What do you think for the future? If you were to look at known knowns for the future, i.e., what sort of prop tech people really need to be engaging with? Have you developed a feeling for what are the must-haves?
So I think from an agent's perspective, so I'm going to start with the residential sector. From an agent's perspective, one of the key things is the ability to know that you're able to use the platform in the way you want. And what I mean by that is, philosophically, is your supplier of whatever nature a walled garden? So will you be locked in? Because I believe that innovation is going to happen more and more quickly and new technologies keep emerging. So if you are with a core provider who believes that they are the sole provider and will not or cannot open up to other partners, are they the right long-term partner for your business? And so an API first approach, and I'm not just saying this from a Fixflo perspective, but when we look at software systems that we consume, so Salesforce and Xero were two examples I gave earlier, a key part of our buying decision is the ability to add on things that we need to create a customized technology stack to run our own business. And so that's the first thing I'd be looking at. The second thing is being at the bleeding edge of technology. While great for prop tech companies, I don't think that most major businesses want to be there. And I think they've learned that they don't necessarily need to be the first, and the competitive advantage of being first typically isn't there. So they wait to see the early adopters and understand from that. So I think we've got a more mature buying group where they look for actual evidence of time savings and efficiencies than they had previously.
That's such good advice, I think, because I think the issue of waiting to see what works. For we mentioned earlier that sort of 70% of estate agents in the residential side are one or two office operations, and for them making a decision can bust the company. They back the wrong animal. They don't want to be at the bleeding edge, as you call it. They want to see something that's been tried and tested.
Yeah.
And I think that the ability to buy from a group, exactly as you just alluded to there, which has been sort of proven, it's stuff which occupies one bit of the whole stack. So you've got everything from sort of prospecting down to what we do, which is the showing people at the other end, everything in between.
Yep.
If they can pick something which has been proven, used by lots of other people, but it is still a bit of a catch-22. I remember, whether on the market works or not at the end of the day is another thing. It's a different animal from what it was to start with. But one of the problems with on the market to start with was that, of course, people turned around and said, I want to wait to see whether it works, number one. And number two, no, I don't want to let go of my competitive advantage. I'll see whether the person down the road works for. And, of course, that's why it never worked. And that is the case with so much prop tech, which is why I think that these collaboration groups of people getting together to offer best in class is, I think, quite important. I think it'll be fascinating to see what happens with Repit and whether the ability of a CRM system to genuinely engage, because most companies these days, and this includes CRM suppliers as well as estate agents, they have people parading in front of them every 15 minutes saying, this is great, this is great. They haven't got a clue which one to go for.
Yep.
It takes up a lot of their time or all their day, and they get quite pissed off with it, frankly, in the end.
Yes.
So they need to see something which is working out there, but it's the old catch-22, and it's something which you've leapfrogged because, Fixflo. I put a thing out on Twitter yesterday saying, has anybody got any questions about Fixflo? And I did get one or two people saying, yes, what is it?
Okay.
Now, you've described it, so you don't need to do that, but it is completely scalable.
Yes.
It can go anywhere, do anything, globally, it's not an issue. Would you need to, if you were going to go into a foreign country, say the Maltese thing you were talking about,
Yep.
does that mean you have to have someone out there, or can you do it all from the UK?
So we operate in 10 countries already. So we've got clients in, and I'm not using the prop tech typical way of having a client is someone who's expressed an interest or doing a trial. So we have real companies, including some listed companies that use our software in Australia and New Zealand, South Africa, the US, Canada, the Republic of Ireland, Spain, Malta, and I'm sure I've forgotten some places along the way, Kenya.
But you don't have people in those countries?
No.
It's all run from the UK?
All of our employees are in the UK, and it is scalable. So our smallest client probably sort of benchmarking it at sort of 40 to 50 properties under management. Our largest has 100,000. We've just been, I'm sure there'll be a press release off the back of this, but it looks like we're going to be used on one of the royal palaces, which is quite interesting.
UK-based royal palaces?
UK.
Okay. That'll definitely be worth some PR, I'm sure. Okay, and we've been talking now for the thick end of half an hour, and it's great to cover this stuff. Let's just get your views on some of the more generic issues of the day. So, Purple Bricks, where do you sit on the sort of online? What's your view of the online sector and its?
I've got a relatively
future?
blunt and simple view, which is I don't believe that the online versus offline is the right way to view it. I think there's a continuum of service, which is how much does the consumer, so the vendor or the landlord, want to do, and it can be anything from purely marketing or lead generation all the way through to a completely handheld bespoke experience. We're currently sat in Oxford Street or thereabouts, and there will be some agents around here who absolutely do everything. And I think that every agent is online in the sense that they have a website and they digitally advertise properties. The question is how many of those services are delivered through technology or supported by technology or only people. And my view is there is a melding together of what was a sort of disparate view of online only versus high street or personal only to a blended service offering.
Yeah, a menu service where people can
Exactly
choose what
right.
bits they need. I mean, it's why I've been quite impressed actually with the open rent offering. I think open rent is a very good, people can use compliant templates to produce their paperwork if they need to, and then they just get a menu of services. We've been working with them for a bit, and people can pay for the bits they need. And I think these days, particularly in a post Section 24 environment with landlords looking to retain yield and maximise yield, they're having to get rid of agents that they're paying 10% to, but they only need a small part of the services that agent provides. Sometimes some agents provide a great service and they need the full 10%'s worth, but a lot of them don't, I think.
So I've got a slightly different view on that. So first of all, I've met the open rent guys and think they're phenomenally smart and nice. The way I see things moving is that most letting agents will move to a managed only offering. So they're becoming true property professionals and experts. So it will extend from the letting and the management process to advice on refurbishments. And I appreciate that some agencies already
proper
do
home management service.
Proper home management services and becoming the local property expert in.
Absolutely,
and that's how I think so you'll end up with a self-serve or slightly assisted self-serve market, and you'll have those people who are willing to understand the difference or do understand the difference between value and price, going for a really high quality service that maximises the value.
It's actually
of their
what my old
assets.
crew at Douglas and Gordon are doing, specifically looking for that concierge, to provide a total end-to-end service from move in to move out. Everything they can provide that. Completely agree. I mean, I'm only seeking what's changed for me, Raj, over the years is that I've because I've seen all these offerings, I try not to have too much of an opinion. And you'll know, as someone who runs a prop tech business, sometimes one has to be careful with opinions on different sectors of the industry because unfortunately our customers are from all areas of the. So if you whatever one's opinions might be, one can't be too strident about it because you don't want to piss them off, for want of a better expression. So the online sector, obviously, I think that's right. I think the online-offline battle doesn't really exist, and I think that stopped being the case some time ago. So long as a business is well run and offers it's what always irritates me about the Purple Bricks discussion is that for a business to go from launching in April 2014 to where it is now, they've clearly been doing something right. Because 21,000 listings or whatever it is they've got, you don't get to that size without the public thinking, well, I quite like that. Now, I'm not quite sure what do you think the reason is, because Purple Bricks get a little bit of flack because some of the service stuff perhaps isn't exactly where it needs to be and whatever. What do you think it is that they're doing right that the public likes?
So I'm not close enough to the detail of how their business works, but as a consumer, I think that their marketing has been absolutely phenomenal. And the message that has sort of resonated, as I see it as a consumer rather than a prop tech owner, is pay nothing up front. And that's really, I think, switched things. So I was interested to watch a video by Adam Day, who started Hatched, and is a lovely chap, where he was talking about the impacts of Purple Bricks, where previously Hatch was doing 50% up front, 50% on completion. The pay nothing up front, which may have been interpreted by some consumers as don't pay anything, depends on the phraseology. I think that's what really cut through to the public understanding.
Even though they were going to be signing an agreement which meant they got to pay it 10 months down the line.
Absolutely. But that is the message that I believe without
Okay,
any
so you think
empirical.
it was that simple? That it was a sort of, as you said, you're not that close to the processes, but in terms of the appeal,
The appeal, and I think the marketing and the sort of television advertising and the investment in it was phenomenal
yeah.
and unseen in UK agency.
Yeah, I mean, ballsy, I think, is the expression, isn't it? If you're going to do it, go big. And I think
Yes.
they did get that absolutely right. I agree. Yes, I'm never quite sure. I can't quite work out whether, estate agents have the wrong opinion of the way the public sees them. We all know that as an estate agent, one doesn't exactly enjoy huge social status. But I think a lot of estate agents think the public really need them to help them do their deals. And I think in some cases that's true. But the public, if they were given a choice of being able to deal with a business where they never had to actually interact with an estate agent as such, they'd quite like that.
I think that consumers increasingly, if they can procure a good or service, a product or a service, without human interaction, that is their preferred method. Amazon
Well, I was just about to say,
is
you've only got to
working
look
through,
at
but
Amazon.
to the question about whether estate agents are loved or valued or even particularly understood as a service in the UK, I think that things are about to change. So I was really interested to read the recommendations on the regulation of property agents, which I think is going to have a fundamental shift. So I worked in a regulated sector. So I was a solicitor, so subject to the rules of the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and had to pass suitability tests. And I think that estate agents and letting agents, and in fact block managers, and if you look at property agents as a whole, have been slightly left out of the professional services sector. So agency is a professional service. Through an agent, whether buying or selling a property or managing a home, they are in large part driving the single greatest asset that an individual or a family could have, and the safety of 4.7 million people in the private rented sector, so 4.7 million households in the private rented sector, as regards gas compliance and the like. So I think that we are moving, and I hope we are moving, to a stage where agents are viewed as, treated as, and judged as professional services providers. And I think the professionalisation of the sector is going to come over the next couple of years.
Yes, I mean, we were talking briefly about that earlier, and you were interested to hear about Viewer, my business, in terms of the people who go out and do the viewings. I'm a big fan of regulation of that. I mean, I've been a fan of regulation of property agents for a long time because I think we deserve to be professionalised and push the cowboy. The trouble with pushing the cowboys out, the cowboys just go and find another industry that's not regulated, which they'll be cowboys in. But nevertheless, we deserve to be professionalised. But in terms of Viewer, people showing properties, the more professional they are, the better the business is. So.
Yes, and it's amazing at the moment. So there's such a patchwork of regulation, quasi-regulation and legislation that affects property agents. I think a consolidation behind a single regulator with a clear, well understood code of conduct and minimum standards for entry, so training, and ongoing professional development will raise the bar of what consumers get. So in the UK, and you'll be the expert on this, Ed, but my understanding is we have amongst the lowest fees for estate agents of anywhere in the world, and we do not have buyer's fees, so the transaction costs are very low. But my belief is that consumers typically, not all consumers, but typically, if they're engaging a professional, will want have a expectation of a level of service from their professional services provider, partner, but the current fees that are being charged do not support that. I think that a base level which forces the rogues or unscrupulous operators out, that increases the quality for consumers, will lead to a better outcome for consumers.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think that's that, and we keep forgetting. I mean, we get obsessed with the idea that the businesses we're helping need to make more money, and we've talked about how fees aren't going up, so therefore the way they maintain margin is by reducing costs. Technology can help them do that.
Yes.
But of course, ultimately, it comes to the consumer, and I think that is what makes Fixflo a bit unusual. Is that it is effectively a sort of B2C business, because the tenants are the consumers ultimately of the product.
Yes.
And for most of us, I don't have a Purple Bricks budget at Viewer to go and spend £6 million or £4 million a month or whatever they spend, letting the public know that they can actually go and view a property whenever they want to. So then when they call their estate agent and say, I want to see a property on Sunday, oh, I'm afraid we're not open. Say, well, I saw that advert for Viewer on telly the other day. Why don't you use Viewer? Then they go, damn, I better use Viewer. I don't have that budget. you have managed to get your product in front of those people to be able to use it, the tenants. And I'm fairly sure that it's such a useful product that I can't believe there aren't some people that go down the pub and actually say to their mates, "Do you know what? I had a thing the other day and look what I did."
So there are a couple of points that come off that. The first is Fixflo is white labelled, so we want our clients to look great. So it's not the Fixflo system, it is X and Co Lettings repairs system. So we put their name front and centre, it doesn't say Fixflo, and we give them materials to help them win new clients. But to the question about people talking about it, we get a lot of new clients who are property managers who rent and say, I used this as a tenant from X letting agency, I thought it was great and I'd love to use it in my business. And so we get a lot of uptake through that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. Look, I mean, interestingly, actually, the next person I'm going to have sitting in that chair there is Kevin Hollingray, the MP, who
Yes.
not only founded Hunters, but clearly has now been in Parliament long enough to get a very good idea of where he thinks the benefits to consumers might come, and the ability to influence that, which is as important, because we all have ideas. I mean, I first started talking about the regulation of property agents 15 years ago. And it's so exciting to see it happening. But actually, Kevin has a different view. I know, having spoken to him, he feels that, we should beef up the redress side of the industry to necessarily. And there are different ways of looking at it, but I think it's great that it's coming down the line. Personally, I'm a massive fan. The entry level exams for this, I know they're not quite at the level of the SRA and what you did in the past when you were a solicitor, but level 3 is like an A level.
Yeah.
It's and I've done it, and at the time I thought, Christ, am I going to pass this? Even though I'd been doing the business for 30 years at that stage.
Yeah.
So I think it's great that it's coming. Look, there's masses. I mean, if you were to look at some of the prop tech businesses you've come across, I mean, you don't necessarily have to mention Vuber, obviously, but are there any that you are fans of which you think people should look at and use, or are you, besides Fixflo, obviously?
So in the commercial sector, so what I've seen is there is a greater budget for innovation in commercial property than in residential property, in part because it's more consolidated, and in part because the larger players are not just regional, they're either national or global. So we've seen quite a lot of smart players in the Internet of Things. So the ability, so I gave the example of a water leak, but in a commercial building or a build-to-rent development, or even in a block of flats, if the boiler is operating outside of the normal bounds, it can trigger an alert, whether through Fixflo or directly to a property manager, to say you need to pay attention to this. Something is not operating as it ought to. I've seen a really smart system where they take aerial drone photography and use that to advise, based on planning laws and genuine artificial intelligence, whether additional floors can be added to a building. I thought that was really smart. In the residential sector, I've heard, and I like to be guided by what our customers say rather than the marketing that people put out. So I hear great things about Vuber on both the lettings and on the sales side, and I genuinely do. PayProp I hear great things about, and some of the CRM providers. So we've spoken about Repick quite a lot, and I hear great things about them. And also most of our CRM partners they target different bits of the market, but I think they're generally opening up to API connections. And if they're not, you probably ought to be asking why.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably got something to do with unified data at some point, and people being able to have, know what they're pulling out on their API fields, as we discussed earlier. Look, I think I'd love to sit here, and I hope at some point in the future when you have globally dominated, and we can talk about the system becoming Big Brother, we can talk again. But Rajeev, Nayyar, thanks so much for taking the trouble to come in. Much appreciated.
Ed, a pleasure. Thanks.